I think this is the only church where I'm aware that you can see the time, so I can check how long I'm going on. Barnabas, the encourager, the man in effect who started Paul on his missionary journeys. Who was Barnabas? He came from Cyprus, from a Jewish Levite family, and the Levites were the tribe from which the priests came in the temple. So he came from what might be called a very respectable background. His real name was Joseph, and he experienced the risen Christ very quickly after the resurrection. I guess we're talking about within the first 12 months. And he joins the church in Jerusalem. And I just say, all my stoles are the same. They all have the same cross. This is the cross for the church in Jerusalem. It's different from any other church in the world. It just reminds us, as it were, the presence experience from which we come. And the interesting thing, instead of calling him Joseph, the early church experienced him and gave him a nickname. Son of consolation, encourager, Barnabas. And so today we remember St. Barnabas, which is his nickname, as opposed to Joseph, which was his real name. I've always thought of you as my Barnabas church. When I retired, I think I've said this before, nearly 14 years ago, I wondered whether I could ever take another service. For 18 years, I had taken 4 or 5 different services every Sunday in the Richmond team ministry. I was deeply fulfilled, but completely exhausted. We were given good advice: take 6 months off, travel, and then see how you feel. And after about 6 months, Julie, your vicar at the time, who'd been a curate at St. James's, asked me to preach and then to help out with the vacancy which happened when she left. And you were actually all very encouraging. Although I do remember one of you saying to me, Julian, we really do enjoy you coming because we don't know what's going to happen next. That wasn't quite the compliment I was looking for at the time. And I still remember Ian at the high altar, me turning over the pages to find the Eucharistic prayer, and Ian saying, times and seasons, which I know now what he meant, I didn't then. Anyway, but it was your encouragement, really, that made me feel I could be of use in vacancies, and I'm just about to finish my 20th vacancy. So you, for me, have always been Ash, my Barnabas church, and I've been here for 2 vacancies with you. And Gareth has become my spiritual director. But back to Barnabas. Barnabas, Paul had been converted, and I would think people were extremely suspicious. Paul had people killed for being Christians, said he'd had this experience, but it is Barnabas who has the courage to trust what's happening in Paul's life. And it is Barnabas who introduces Paul to the early church in Jerusalem. And because Barnabas trusted him, the leadership in Jerusalem. And they must have been both excited and quite frightened at the thought of this, as it were, persecutor of the church joining the early church. And he was, of course, very impressive, the most educated among them, Pharisee trained under Gamaliel. And as we heard in our reading, the early church, when they heard what was happening in Antioch, Gentiles, for the first time in big numbers, were being converted. What to do? They sent the person they trusted to go and find out, see what was happening, was all in order. And so Barnabas goes off to Antioch. But he remembers Paul, and he remembered the power of Paul. He thought, I think if he can bring Paul to Tarsus, what a difference from Tarsus to Antioch. Very quickly, if you can imagine, Tarsus is up there, 100 miles south is Antioch, and another 500 miles is Jerusalem. And that's all by road. I mean, it's slow traveling. It's just half a sentence in Acts. So he brings Paul to Antioch, and Antioch, the two of them, I would think, a very powerful combination. And at the end of the year, they feel led by the Spirit, encouraged by the church to start on the first missionary journey, which for me is I may give myself away, that was my O-level. How many of you did O-level doing Paul's missionary journeys? Am I the only one? Oh, thank you. Anne, thank you. Good. But in a way, part of me wants to say the rest of the story is history, but actually there were crucial challenges for the church to face, and Barnabas and Paul were at the heart of them. But the thing about Barnabas, he was clearly trusted, and he was clearly, as his name said, his nickname, he was an encourager. Just for a moment, think of the people in your lives who have been Barnabas to you. And I take it Barnabas is a gender-neutral name. Who are the people who've encouraged you? Who are the people who've welcomed you in new jobs, new situations, perhaps even new church roles? And who are the people who've remained our friends, however difficult we've become, or whatever the troughs that we've been through, who've been there steadily through the years? You know this. No, I think a church can be shrunk or grown by the quality of the Barnabases in it. I like to think all of us have a potential to be Barnabases, but I can still think that somebody called Liz Lanyon, she must be now in her 90s, and I used to say of Liz, if you can't be encouraged by Liz Lanyon, then you are a frozen human being. She was one of these women, incredibly attractive, she'd been on the telly for years, but if you met Liz, you went away feeling great as a person and as a man. Barnabases, you will know who real Barnabases are, but encourage one another. So crucial. When I'm coming here, I think of certain people. I have to think of certain people because coming here now is getting more dangerous. The road surface, my scooter complained to me this morning. The road surface has got worse since I last came. Anyone else noticing this? I know it's all over the country, I know that. And being an encourager can take not only discernment, but I think sometimes courage. Barnabas had the courage to recognize who Paul was. Even though others were frightened, he recognized who he was. He wasn't afraid to introduce Paul to other Christians, and he wasn't afraid to stand up to Paul. Their first missionary journey, they had a young man with them called John Mark, and it got too much for him and he went home. And Paul basically said, we won't take him with us again. Barnabas stood up to him and said, if that's what you feel, you must find someone else. I'm going to stick with the younger man. Barnabas stuck up for John Mark. That was the kind of character Barnabas was. I come back, though, to why I think Barnabas, I guess I have always valued Barnabases, and I tried to be a Barnabas. And I remember when I was chaplain to Abbey National in Milton Keynes, and it went from 400 to 4,000 in the 8 years we were there. Abbey National, now Santander. And they put us all through a course. All 18,000 employees of Abbey National went through this 2.5-day course. Ours was in Castle Howard, and the food was fantastic, I remember that. But what was so impressive was the course was entitled, You Are the Difference. And at the end, we got a filofax with emblazoned on it, You Are the Difference. And basically, at one level, it was about how we should treat the customers. But actually, it was about how we could be Barnabases to each other. In the very small offices around Great Britain, how could you care for each other? And at the end of the course, I still remember we were asked to write little notes to each of the participants in our group. Never forgotten that. Never be embarrassed. Send little notes. I mean, today it would be emails. Little notes of encouragement make such a difference. Or if you're like me and you find writing notes difficult because you're spelling, you leave a message on their phone. Chances are they won't pick up these days. Or in one parish I ring up, I have 5 options. Oh dear. Anyway, do be encouragers. It's so important. But having got carried away a bit with Barnabas, he too could get things wrong. If we're talking about 33 for the crucifixion, Paul converted, let's say 36. About 10 years later, there was a big conference in Jerusalem. There was a real clash going on in the church. It was between those who were Jewish Christians and saying if you're going to be a Christian, follow Jesus, you have to obey the law, have to be circumcised. Now, actually, I suspect that would rule most of us, if not all of us, out. And the battle was between, if you like, Paul and Barnabas, the new missionaries, the pioneers, and the old guard. At the end of the conference, it's actually Peter who gets up and says, it's not the law that matters, it is following Jesus Christ. And that was the deal. Interestingly, the key issue around this, odd for us, was around food. Whether who you ate with really, really mattered. And the point was, could all those converted, experiencing Jesus, eat round the same table? This for me is very poignant. 2 or 3 years later, Paul and Barnabas are back in Antioch, preaching to the earliest, and by now I suspect the best known and the most popular church around the Mediterranean, perhaps in Jerusalem. And Peter comes back to share in the ministry, but he will not eat with the new Gentile converts. He will only eat with those who are Jews. And Paul, of course, is appalled, and he just writes this to the Christians in Galatia. Our Jewish brothers started acting like cowards along with Peter. And then, this is painful, I think, even Barnabas was swept along by their cowardly actions, and Barnabas rejoined the Jews for meals. Paul made one of his impassioned speeches. We are put right with God, not by doing what the law requires, but through faith in Jesus Christ. Although I always want to say it's not just our faith in Jesus Christ. Above all, it's his faith in us. I felt at that moment, the future of the church is held by a thread. If Paul had given in then, we would not be here. The world church would not be here. And so today, as I thank God for Barnabas, the Barnabas is my life, thank God for you, I also remember, because I know, and perhaps you know too, the times when I have been given in to peer pressure, which is what Barnabas did. And I think, all of it, I think of the times in parishes, partly I've listened to the last person I've spoken to, but partly I've given in to peer pressure and done what I know isn't right, or not stood up for I know what is right. So today, as well as giving thanks for Barnabas, I do give thanks for Paul of Tarsus, who at that crucial moment stood up for you and I, for Christ's sake.